I'm looking at the Maroon, and I mean, if you were going to buy an issue of a college newspaper and use it for an investment scheme, this one would be a very, very good one to use. As a matter of fact, I believe it might actually have been used in part of the investment of the actual Women's Center of Note. But what I'm more interested in what I would have been considered in league with at the time, and that would have been later in the issue on the editorial pages. As a matter of fact, in Viewpoint, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that Viewpoint was the section heading for where I had my column, and I alternated my column with the person who at the time was the president of the College Republicans. He had a column by one name, and it did it every other week, and in the other weeks, the staggered weeks, I did my column, which was called Right of Way. So I could potentially have been a few years later on page 31, and or pay I would have been on page 31, not page 33 where you have the letters from the students, right? Letter from the, oh, actually I might have been on page 33 where you have the so it could have been on page 31 or page 33. So what do we have on page 33? On page 33, under Viewpoint, UFC students misrepresented, which is a letter from a student who I believe was set to graduate that year, discussing a Newsweek rendition or a Newsweek version of what was going on campus as being misrepresentative, and specifically references to Regenstein Library. Well, they talk about the Regenstein Library as being this droll place for study. But after I was no longer at the university, few years later, 2 years later, in this same section, there was controversy because there was a column called Sex in the Reg, which was all about allegations of, and or shall we say, jokes or revelations of people actually engaging in sexual activity in the stacks of the Regenstein Library. 20 years later, I believe that started in what, 1996. It would have been published in 1996. Now, I was working at Harper Library, not the Regenstein Library at the time, right? 20 years later, Sex in the Reg. All right, well, what's on the other side? That's the left side. What's on the right side? Midway Review under fire for biblical allusions on homosexuality. It is a letter from somebody in the divinity school regarding the Midway Review's publication of Come Again with That Judeo Christian Ethic, condemning, talking about condemnations of homosexuality, and that the university community needs to respond, and then provides a letter. It has numerous references to actual biblical scripture refuting or discussing the author's view on homosexuality. Okay, all right. Maybe I would have been in one of those, but I actually don't know. I really don't know. I might have actually been on page 31. And what do we have on page 31? Well, apparently it is a editorial by somebody who was the editor in chief of the publication in 1948. So that would have been what? That would have been 38 years before this, right? So 38 years prior, he was the newspaper editor at a college newspaper, which implies he was an alumni. And what is Reagan administration headed for serious downfall? And it says that it is a reprint from the Washington Post Writers Group. So it would seem that this person had a career and had done something else besides perform as or engage as editor of chief of his college newspaper. You mean you can write an article or a column in a private university newspaper and maybe accomplish something more in your life than writing a column in that private university's newspaper? Other people are able to do that? Are they able to have other affiliations later in life that they are supposed to be involved with? Let me ask you, did he have some sort of security set up on him from the time frame during which he was the editor of in chief of the Maroon? And this was maybe a 2 year advance notice so that he could get that 40 year? Who is this man? Well, I'm not going to mention his name. We don't seem to really have a relationship where we actually acknowledge who the actual authors are. Why? Because of who he quotes. What paragraph? One, two, three. Now, we all know in standard journalism, not editorial journalism, but if you're writing an article, the first three paragraphs usually mean something very important in the actual structure. But editorial? I don't know. Did he write any hard news? Was he an investigative journalist that might have had something else in his body or repertoire as a journalist or as a writer in another sector that may have been cross referenced or compared with his earlier work? One, two, three. Fourth paragraph. When things go this wrong, this fast, you have to suppose that something truly corrosive is at work. It is, as Representative Dick Cheney, R. Wyoming, the able former chief of staff to President Ford, remarked. You have to say it's a pretty fundamental flaw that would allow a lieutenant colonel on the White House staff to operate in defiance of the law. A lieutenant colonel at least is an officer, right? Do you think the former chief of staff to President Ford himself may have something in relationship to the use of the word corrosive as a benchmark on page 31 for what is on page... No. I want to make sure we get it. You're doing this with me, right? Because you have this up right now. It's accessible to you. I mean, this is in the public realm. All you had to do was go and find it, and then you could look at it real time with me. That's what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to be in the room with each other. We're not supposed to have the same document that we can actually verify. It's not like they would take an electronic copy from my computer and maybe hack it so that I got something different than you do. So what I'm reading is not the same as what you're reading. And so considerations of who gets preferential treatment and what that might actually mean in terms of refusing to acknowledge potential conflict of interest going in. Here we go. Contributing writer. This is not even an advertisement, by the way. This is an actual article by a contributing writer. And the topic is, oh my God, forget about the Ford. The person who wanted to lean on me actually had a motor vehicle whose name was the same as the first name of the writer of this article. And what is the article about? Chase Manhattan finances new scholarship. A 100,000 fund will aid students seeking a career in the petroleum industries. I don't need to look at anything else. I'm fucking covered, right? I'm totally fucking covered. Now you need to get me original versions of the publication of the Chicago Maroons from 1995 and 1996, where I had articles, specifically my columns on affirmative action, and the column I also did on the use of the word fascism or fascist in political opportunism. Those were the two major columns that I wrote that caused controversy, including a later recrimination of me as somehow aiding and abetting the Ku Klux Klan. See, I had that copy of that publication too. Somebody wrote a dissent, somebody wrote a critique of what I had published in the Chicago Maroon. I kept that. I read the whole thing. There was actually some valid points in it. I need to get original publication of the columns I wrote, Right of Way, Charity Kraus, Chicago Maroon, 1995 and 1996.